Hey hikers and outdoor lovers, what if your next adventure could help cure children's cancer? With the Cure Search Ultimate Hike, that's exactly what you'll do. Choose from 8 breathtaking trails and destinations across the country, like Mount Tamalpais in the Bay Area, the stunning Jackson Hole, or the scenic Shenandoah Valley. And that's just the start. Here's the challenge. Each Ultimate Hike pushes you to go the distance, up to 28 miles in a single day. It's tough, but it's totally doable, no matter your fitness level. Shorter distance options are available, and you'll get expert training every step of the way, both in person and virtually, so you'll be ready to tackle the trails like a pro. And as a special thank you for tuning in to the Hikes and Mikes podcast, you can register for the 2025 Ultimate Hike for free. Just use the promo code Hikes and Mikes when you sign up at theultimatehike.org, and your registration fee is waived. Ultimate Hike is the nation's largest endurance program dedicated to funding childhood cancer research. So if you're ready to lace up your boots, hit ultimatehike.org and let's hike together to make a life-saving impact. Don't forget, use code Hikes and Mikes, all one word, for free registration. Let's hit the trails and cure kids' cancer. Welcome everyone to the Hikes and Mikes podcast. I'm your host Ivan, and together we'll embark on a weekly journey connecting with extraordinary hikers from all corners of the United States and beyond. Throughout these fall months, we've had the privilege of conversing with some remarkable individuals. Their experiences and adventures will leave you yearning to hit the trails. In this week's episode, we have the amazing host of the Virginia Outdoor Adventures podcast. Her name is Jessica Bowser, and you can follow her on Instagram at Virginia Outdoor Adventures. We talked to Jessica about some of her favorite hiking destinations in and around Virginia, including some coastal hiking and camping destinations. We also learn about the other amazing outdoor opportunities Virginia has to offer. And Jessica not only shares the origin story behind her podcast, but what listeners can expect from Season 5. Without further ado, let's jump into this episode with our guest, Jessica. Welcome everyone to the latest episode of the Hikes and Mikes podcast. I have a really exciting guest with me today. Her name is Jessica, and she's the host of the Virginia Outdoor Adventures podcast. And we're going to be learning all about what VA has to offer for the outdoors, a little bit about her podcast, and her experiences there in Virginia. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. We always like to start off by having our guests share a little bit about themselves and how they got started hiking.
Thank you so much for having me, Ivan. I live in Northern Virginia, which is just a few miles outside of Washington, D.C. It's a huge metropolis, and most people don't think that there's a lot of hiking or even a lot of outdoorsy things to do in Northern Virginia. But it's actually quite the opposite. There's a plethora of hiking trails, of local parks, and we're also not that far from many of the tributaries that feed into the Chesapeake Bay, including the Potomac River. There's actually quite a lot of water activities as well. The Blue Ridge Mountains are only about an hour to the west. So between the mountains and the bay and the ocean, there's a whole lot to do here. I started off hiking as a child, although I will say that it wasn't really hiking. At that time, that it was mostly just me playing in the backyard and getting lost in the woods for the most part. I was very fortunate as a child to spend a lot of time outside because it helped foster my love for the outdoors and that connection with nature that we know is so important. And that has followed me right into adulthood. And now I get to share that love and that joy and that connection with the outdoors with an audience. So I feel like I'm very fortunate. I also used to be an elementary school teacher. So I'm combining that skill set of being an educator with my love for the outdoors and also my belief that we should all be stewards of the outdoors. And so it's all come together to become Virginia Outdoor Adventures podcast.
I've said this on previous episodes, but like Virginia, North Carolina, and Tennessee, they are really underrated gems when it comes to outdoor experiences. Not just hiking, but, the Blue Ridge Mountains, all the beautiful waterfalls that you have, the ocean. I mean, you guys have a little bit of everything for people that want to enjoy the outdoors. We're recording this at the tail end, or I guess not the tail end, but the middle of fall. And we've been asking guests so far how their summer hiking season was.
Ooh, rough. Ivan, I'm not going to lie. Virginia was incredibly hot this past summer, we had some record-breaking heat. There were a couple of weeks where the temperatures were at or above 100 degrees. And in Virginia, it's not just heat, it's humidity as well. So I did very little hiking this summer compared to what I have done in the past. And it's kind of ironic because I have family in Europe who were here visiting this summer. I had a cousin from Austria, and she lives very close to the Julian Alps, and she's a big hiker herself. She and her boyfriend were here, and they couldn't tolerate it. It was sort of funny at times, but then I actually felt really bad for her because they looked so miserable. And for over a year, she'd been talking about how she couldn't wait to come visit the US and how she really wanted to do some hikes because she sees all of my pictures and all my videos and was so excited about it. And then she got here and she had zero interest. I mean, it was hard just to walk down the sidewalk. So unfortunately, I didn't do nearly as much hiking as I would have liked to.
You know, I've only been able to make it out to Georgia, but that humidity that the southern and eastern states have, it is no joke. Like, it literally physically hits you once you step outside. And I know a lot of people go out early and try to beat it, but the beautiful thing about Virginia is you guys have a lot of water activities, so there's kind of ways you can beat the heat. In your own personal experiences, how would you describe the hiking scene in and around your local neck of the woods?
Pretty epic, if I do say so myself. I really love Virginia because there's such a wide variety of trails. Most people tend to think about the Appalachians when it comes to Virginia and the Blue Ridge. And definitely those are beautiful, but also we have rolling hills in the Piedmont, which is the center of the state. We have Southern Virginia that has some beautiful lakes. And then we have sort of coastal hiking as well. And coastal hiking is just a completely different experience than hiking in mountains. So there really is a large variety. There's a lot to do. And I would encourage anybody who wants to come check it out to definitely do so because it can be a very different experience in other parts of the U.S.
Like, just going through your feed, Jessica, it had such a diverse landscape. And, you know, there's a couple in particular that caught my attention. There was a bridge that they converted into a trail, multi-purpose trail for not just walking and hiking, but also bicycling. And like you mentioned, you have the Appalachian Mountains, you have Chesapeake Bay. In your own personal experience, what have been some of your favorite outdoor spots in the state?
Oh my gosh, that's like asking a parent what their favorite child is. How do you really pick? I think that our state parks are a wonderful gem that we have here in Virginia. We have 42 state parks, many of which were opened in the 1930s under the New Deal. And so a lot of the infrastructure for these parks were built by the Civilian Conservation Corps. So when you visit them, you might eat your lunch in a picnic shelter that was built during that time, or stay in a cabin, like a log cabin that was built during that time. And it just has a very unique feel to it. I think that is really cool. But some of my favorite things, I really love beach hiking and camping. And I think that it takes a different type of preparation for it. It's very unlike backpacking in the mountains. You have to think of things that you wouldn't have thought of before, like your tent needs to have sand stakes, for example, and you need to be prepared for insects the way you really wouldn't up in the mountains. But at the same time, you're going to see things and experience things that are completely different. A beach sunrise from your tent, if you haven't done that yet, you haven't lived. You need to get out there and give it a try. Or, you know, sometimes you might be sleeping in your tent near the beach and a wild pony walks by and starts eating the grasses. I mean, it's completely different. But also there is something truly magical about our mountains here too. There's kind of a famous book here about a woman who was a school teacher in the 1940s. It's a historical fiction. And she was writing about what it was like to be a school teacher in a one-room schoolhouse in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And she said that when you looked out over the Blue Ridge, they were never the same shade of blue from one day to the next. So our landscape is always changing and it's absolutely gorgeous.
You got me interested in this beach camping, and I got to ask, like, how far ahead would you have to reserve a campsite, or is it first come, first serve?
There are a few first come, first serves. I wouldn't recommend going that route. I would definitely make a reservation. And I'm sure you've noticed this, but I think just all over the place since COVID, getting a campsite anywhere seems like it's so much more difficult than it used to be. So if you know that it's something you want to do in the future, I would get on the reservation sites and just start looking now. Sometimes it's 6 months if your availability is weekends only. And for a lot of working folks, that's the case. If you have the flexibility to go during the week, it's not so much an issue, but it's the weekend crowds that can become difficult to overcome.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, you hit it right on the head. Ever since COVID, people are loving the outdoors, which is great, but it definitely makes it hard to get some reservations for some of the local campgrounds. Now, Jessica, one thing that we were discussing before we started recording is like the audience tends to resonate about long lost trails or monuments. And I feel like people, because of the crowds, are starting to search for lesser known destinations that might be just as majestic as some of the popular destinations, but without the crowds. Are there any lesser known outdoor destinations in Virginia that you think more people should explore?
Yeah, absolutely. I would start with the wildlife management areas, and those are managed by the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. And they are, well, let me think. I think there's 40 some properties around the state. They're not all open to the public, but most of them are. And you can go onto their website and it'll tell you, where the access points are and what's available there. Sometimes it's hunting. Sometimes there's a lake for fishing or boating. Sometimes you can backpack there. It just depends on where it is. But because they're all over the state, there's a huge variety of landscapes that you can take advantage of. And I kind of felt a little stupid, honestly, during the pandemic when I discovered these myself, because I was like, I can't keep going to state parks because all of a sudden they are so crowded that sometimes they were closing the gate at 9 or 10 in the morning because the parking lot was full and they couldn't accept any more vehicles in. Same thing with our national parks. And parks are kind of the main draw for people. Like when you think about going outside or doing something outside, most people think about parks, and it's completely understandable why. Parks have amenities. They have things like parking lots and restrooms and visitor centers, and maybe there's a gift shop, maybe there's kayak rentals or picnic grounds or water fountains. But you go to some of these other areas like the wildlife management areas, and there's almost none of that. Like there might be a gravel parking lot with enough space for 3 to 5 cars, and that's all you're getting. And so people don't think to go to those places, but they are perfect for if you're trying to find some solitude and if you don't mind not having a restroom and using a tree or a bush or whatever's available to you in the woods. I think that they're a real gem, and especially for wildlife watching, because a lot of times the animals there, they're not used to a lot of people because they're not heavily visited. And I think they're wonderful for wildlife watching opportunities.
One thing I noticed, Jessica, about your feed is that you've been able to visit and explore VA in a multitude of different vehicles and apparatuses, from kayaking to bicycling, other water activities. Is there any activity or destination that's still on your personal bucket list there in VA?
People ask me this all the time. There are a few hikes here and there that I don't usually share simply because I want to be mindful of what locations I'm drawing attention to and the locations that I'm encouraging people to visit. So there are a few places that are kind of, quote unquote famous, I guess you could say, that I haven't been to yet. Some of that is a little bit on purpose though, because I don't want to draw too much attention to a place that's already getting too much attention, if that makes sense. I'm more of like the hidden gems kind of person and the solitude and the connection with nature than the, let me take this, picture of myself with some epic waterfall or something. But instead, I try to focus on the experiences as well. My podcast covers a plethora of outdoor recreation activities, not just hiking. I have episodes on things like mountain biking and caving and foraging for wild edible plants and whale watching and wildlife watching. It's everything that you could think of that you could possibly take advantage of here in Virginia. I think it's introducing people to new things that they wouldn't have thought of. And that's been really exciting because the feedback that I get is, I had no idea we had whale watching in Virginia. And I hear that from people who grew up in Virginia Beach, where you can go whale watching and they don't know that you can go whale watching. So it's been a lot of fun to be able to introduce people to things that they didn't know existed.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I count me in the list that didn't know that Virginia had whale watching experiences. That's really awesome.
Yeah, you might not have also known that we have ice climbing here too. People don't think of the South as an ice climbing destination, but we have that as well. If you're on the Blue Ridge Parkway or nearby in the winter when the conditions are right, there's some pretty great ice climbing.
And I imagine some of those waterfalls probably freeze over and can possibly be a destination, right?
Yes, exactly.
Now, with whale watching, they can be seasonal experiences when they're migrating. And the outdoor scene, I imagine, in Virginia changes from spring to summer, fall to winter. Being that we're in the middle of fall, are there any favorite outdoor activities that people should be on the lookout, not just for fall, but maybe for winter?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when people think about peak leaf season and leaf peeping, they tend to think of the Northeast, like Vermont, for example, is a place that comes to mind for folks. But Virginia is pretty gorgeous in the fall, especially when we have a really extended fall season. And what's also nice about Virginia is that the leaves change in different patterns because of the elevation change throughout the state. So it'll start in the higher elevation mountains, and then it'll sweep across the Piedmont towards the coast. And the coast might not have leaf changing until 6 weeks, a month to 6 weeks after the first leaf color that we saw in the higher elevations. So there's a really extended leaf peeping season here, which is really neat. And people are starting to take notice. We are getting more and more visitors from outside the state for that. So that's pretty cool. I wouldn't miss it. It's definitely beautiful. For upcoming winter, I would say coastal hiking. Most people don't think of going to the coast in the winter, but coastal hiking in the winter is amazing. Most folks go to the beach in the summer and they're laying on their towels and they're splashing around in the water and maybe they're playing some games on the beach. But for the most part, they're not watching wildlife. They're not hiking the trails. All of that is so great in the winter when all of those, beachgoers are gone and the place is quiet and the beach takes on a completely different feel. So that is a really wonderful opportunity. And you're missing also the crowds in the restaurants, in the hotels, in the cabins, the campgrounds, the places that you might be staying. Winter can get kind of brutal, especially if you're on the water. But for the most part, the weather here in Virginia isn't too extreme. So you can still camp in the winter on the beach and be comfortable. So there's lots of opportunities for that too.
I got to ask, just because, North Carolina, Virginia have been on my list for fall foliage. When's the right time? I know it varies from year to year. Like, when should people start considering booking their trip?
It does change from year to year. So in early October is when they start to publish the peak leaf color predictions. And Virginia Tourism, otherwise known as Virginia is for Lovers, publishes this. So does Virginia State Parks. And they'll give you a very nice map of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and they will show you in highlighted different colors the regions and the dates that they're expected to peak. Now, that can be a little bit tough if they don't release that until early October, late September, and you really want to make a reservation many months in advance. For that, I would say aim for the end of October, early November. I have seen it peak at late October, but it's almost always early November, unless you're farther down in the southwest corner of Virginia, in the Appalachians, where the elevation is higher. That's usually where it first begins to peak. So it depends on where exactly you're planning to be, but I would say the farther north you go, the later it's going to peak, and the farther south you are in the mountains, the earlier it will peak.
Jessica, you've done a really great job of highlighting the amazing opportunities Virginia has to offer for outdoor experiences. In your personal opinion, what sets Virginia's outdoor adventures apart from neighboring states?
Well, it depends on which neighboring states we're talking about, but I think Virginia has a lot of really quaint small towns that I refer to as adventure towns. And a lot of these towns, a big portion of their economy relies on tourism and especially ecotourism these days. So like Southwest Virginia, when you think about how their main industry used to be coal mining, and coal mining is not as strong of an industry as it used to be, they're looking for ways to boost their economy. And so they're turning to ecotourism as one of those options. And they are attracting people from all over the country to the area to take advantage of things like ATVing and fishing and elk tours and other wildlife watching tours. It's really neat to see what they've done. Rock climbing is another really big one. A lot of people go rock climbing in the New River Gorge. What's the one in Kentucky? Red River Gorge? Is that right?
Maybe. I'm not too sure.
Yeah, Virginia has rock climbing opportunities that are just as good and without all of the crowds. We have a lot of small towns that have really epic outdoor recreation opportunities, and then they've got this quaint small town feels. We kind of know that certain things go hand in hand with hiking and the outdoors. Like when you're done with a hike, what's better than finding a craft brewery with a fire pit outside where you can hang out with your friends or even just by yourself and have a really good craft beer or a wine or cider or bourbon or whatever it happens to be, because Virginia's got all of those things. It's the experience, and it's not just going out for the hike, it's the full experience. And if you want to do something like that for a weekend, there's lots of places to do that around Virginia.
Yeah, and I got to ask, like, where are some of those quaint mountain towns? Are they scattered throughout the state, or are they kind of concentrated in a specific region?
They are most definitely scattered, and I'll give you an example of one. So the town of St. Paul, super tiny. They have less than 1,000 residents in this town, but it is on the Clinch River, and the Clinch River is one of the most biodiverse rivers in the United States. It is epic for fishing. It is epic for kayaking. It's got a brand new state park that was just built there, and the state park is unique in that it's not just one large pocket of land, but it's actually many pieces of land all down the Clinch River. They call it a string of pearls. And so you can go from one boat launch to the next, and you can plan to travel the river that way by putting in and out at all these different state park boat launches up and down the river. They also have ATVing. They have some really fantastic ATV trails, like the Spearhead Trails. People are coming from all over the place to ride the Spearhead Trails in ATVs. Sometimes they bring their own ATV, or you can rent an ATV right there. And the town did something very smart. They opened up this adorable boutique hotel called the Western Front Hotel, and it is literally made for outdoor adventurers. This place completely caters to outdoor adventurers. As soon as you walk in, you know it with the gorgeous artwork on the wall that says adventure everywhere, and they have these beautiful paintings of the Clinch River and of the mountains, and you can rent ATVs right from the hotel. Like they're literally lined up behind the hotel, and then you get on the ATV, and from there you just turn a couple corners and you're on the trail. And it's fantastic. You can travel like most of the region on those ATV trails. And when you do, you're going to see deer and you're going to see black bear. And now, because of the reintroduction of elk in Southwest Virginia, you might even see an elk.
You definitely have me motivated to go visit Virginia, and I am going to add that lodge, a boutique hotel, on my bucket list, because that sounds amazing. I don't have to worry about going to a third-party ATV rental. You could just get it right there at the hotel and just take off. That's awesome. Now, Jessica, at the beginning of the episode, we said that you're a host of the amazing Virginia Outdoor Adventures podcast. And you know, for me personally, being a host as well, I'm always interested in learning the origin story of others and their podcast. Can you share with us what inspired you to start the Virginia Outdoor Adventures podcast? And was there a particular moment or experience that sparked the idea?
Yeah, so before the podcast existed, I was an elementary school teacher for a while. And then after that, I sort of went into public education, policy, and advocacy. And I was working for a nonprofit when the pandemic started, and I got laid off. And so I was sitting at home trying to figure out what exactly I was going to do with my life. The idea for the podcast came along because before that, I had been traveling around Virginia frequently, visiting parks and other interesting places that I had read about or had learned about that I wanted to experience for myself. And then I would share it on social media like anybody else does. And I'd be posting on Facebook, hey, here's my pictures. But also maybe this is my my teacher eye, but I wanted to help people understand why these places were significant and tell them how they could visit if they wanted to do it too. And so it didn't take long before a lot of my friends were like, you know, you really need to start a blog or you really need to write a book. And I was like, yeah, that's great, but who's got time for that? It's not me. And then this pandemic started. All of a sudden I had all this time on my hands. So I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to start a podcast just for fun. And then, you know, when this whole pandemic thing blows over, I'll go back to work and I don't know what will happen after that. Like I really did not have long-term plans for this whatsoever. So I started the podcast and to my surprise, it took off. I think it had a lot to do with being in the right place at the right time. Everybody looking to get outside because that was one of the only safe things that we could do. It seemed like people flooded into the outdoors. And so my podcast became a resource very quickly. When I was approached by my first sponsor, that's when the light bulb went off. I was like, oh, maybe I could get paid for doing this. this. And still, I never would have thought that this was going to be a job. I just thought, well, this is good that I could get paid because podcasts cost some money, but you don't get to do this for free. I mean, you can do it for free, but it's not going to be high quality. If you want to do it well, there's all these subscriptions and services that you need, and all those things cost money. And it didn't make any sense for me to put all this time and my own money into the podcast. So I was like, let me just get reimbursed for all of that. As my audience grew, I realized that, I actually want to keep doing this. Like, I was getting amazing feedback from people, but also it wasn't just like, hey, I love your podcast. This is great. I was also getting messages like, I was going through a really hard time after my brother suddenly passed away, and finding your podcast encouraged me to get outside and connect with the outdoors and became part of my healing process. Or I got another message from somebody who told me that they had an adult son that they hadn't spoken to in years, but that they wanted to work on their relationship. And one thing that they decided to do was to go hiking and camping together. And they started listening to my podcast together so that they could talk about how to plan their next hike or how to plan their next camping trip. But it also gave them something to discuss that they both enjoyed. And so over a period of time, this person reconnected with their adult son because of the podcast, or at least they give a lot of credit to the podcast for being a part of that process. And I started to realize this is so much more than just me sharing what a cool hike or what a cool trail this might be, or check out this park. This is something that's bigger than myself. And then I felt like, I want to keep doing this because it's bringing joy to people's lives, and, why not keep doing it? So now I do it full time.
I'm glad that you've been able to get that feedback, because that definitely helps you keep going. And, you've been able to share a wealth of knowledge about what VA has to offer on your podcast. And I think you've helped a lot of people explore Virginia, but at least from my personal experience, hosting this podcast has also helped me grow my relationship with the outdoors, especially here in Washington State. Have you had a similar impact where the podcast has impacted your relationship with the outdoors in your home state?
Oh, absolutely. And so many ways that I couldn't possibly tell you in this one recording. But, primarily I would say it's increased my appreciation for the outdoors, but it's also increased my appreciation for the people who take care of our outdoor spaces and who manage our outdoor spaces, and the nonprofits out there who are making our outdoor spaces accessible to other people. It's through this podcast that I've gotten to ride along with park rangers in their truck through the parks, and I've gotten to see places that are close to the public, and I've gotten to hear stories that they're not going to share with anybody else. And it has just made me realize their jobs are extremely hard. I don't care what anybody says. Their jobs are tough. And I'm so appreciative to them for what they do, but also that we have to protect these outdoor spaces, or they're not going to just continue to exist on their own, unfortunately. If we want to preserve them, we have to do our part to do that. Through my podcast, while I might be talking about outdoor recreation, I'm also weaving in the conservation part of it and the stewardship and volunteerism and what we all need to do to help preserve these places. So yeah, it's changed my perspective incredibly. It's also made me very frustrated when I see other people who are out there abusing it, and not just abusing it as in like carving their name on a tree or dumping trash somewhere, but also the people on social media who are exploiting the outdoors to promote themselves because they want to grow their following and they want to get more engagement and they want brands to pay them to advertise their stuff. And they're doing all of this through exploiting the outdoors for their own gain. That's really turned me off to a lot of social media and what we are now experiencing as common in social media. So yeah, it's changed my perspective quite a bit.
One thing I noticed is that the outdoor advocacy and conservation is really important to your podcast mission. And you've been able to feature some guests with a focus on preserving Virginia's natural spaces. Are there any that kind of stick out that folks should be checking out if they're interested in conservation or outdoor advocacy there in Virginia?
Yeah, I would say most of the episodes do, but a couple that come to mind, for example, last spring, I did this episode with the James River Association, and the focus of the episode was on paddling the river and camping alongside the river too. That was a huge hit, but also the James River Association does so much to preserve the James and to make sure that the water there is clean, because a good portion of people living in Virginia get their drinking water from the James River. And it's important that the wildlife in and around the river stay healthy. So there's a lot to think about when we are paddling and when we are camping alongside the river. And then I have some episodes that focus on getting more people into the outdoors as far as making it more accessible to folks with disabilities or other challenges. So yeah, there's a lot to think about when it comes to accessibility. There's also a lot to think about when it comes to stewardship. And I just tried to weave all of that into each one of my episodes so that it's not something that we talk about occasionally. If we love the outdoors, then we have to do our part. And it's something that we should be thinking about all the time.
Very true. And you're doing a great job in helping promote that advocacy and conservation. And I mean, not just Virginia, but it's all our public spaces in the United States and the world. In your personal experience, are there any pressing environmental or conservation issues that are in Virginia that you're particularly passionate about and want to bring some awareness to?
Yeah. So I think a lot of the things that concern me the most are things that people would never even think about. Like, for example, just this past week, the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation released a list of 11 new non-native invasive plants. And I'm going to be talking about this on my podcast. And I know there are going to be people who are going to be like, so what? And I'm not going to list all of those plants here tonight. And I'm not going to on my own podcast either. But when I was reading through this list of non-native invasive plants, there were several of them that are aquatic. And one in particular, according to the description, this aquatic plant will take over small ponds and lakes and streams as well. Like if it gets transplanted into that area, it will spread very quickly. So now what does that mean to us? Is this just another plant on the list, or like why should we care as outdoor recreationists? Well, imagine this. Let's just say that there is a park in your neighborhood that is important to you. You know, it's a park that you visit often. It's a place that you enjoy. Maybe you walk the dog. Maybe you go fishing. Maybe you hike the trails. Maybe you paddle. Lots of different things that could happen there. And this non-native invasive plant finds its way into the lake in your neighborhood park and it starts to spread. Now, what does that mean for you? Are you still going to be able to paddle on that lake if you have to paddle through a sea of this plant that's so thick that you can't get a boat through? Probably not. It's going to choke out other native plants. It's going to make it difficult for fish to live. So now if you enjoy fishing, are you going to be fishing there? Probably not. So pretty soon there's going to be an impact that's going to make people who enjoy these outdoor recreation activities decide to go somewhere else. So now what does that mean for that park? Now, when you think about funding, most state parks get their funding from their state legislature, and more often than not, they're underfunded. Localities are all different from one locality to the next, but one thing they almost always have in common is they're underfunded. So this plant, once it takes root and starts to spread, is very expensive to manage and remove. And even if a locality can afford to have it removed once and it comes back, then what? So now people are leaving, and oftentimes when parks are underfunded, they rely on visitation for funding, and that funding goes towards all of the amenities. Things like paving the parking lot and having a restroom that's accessible with, toilets to flush and a door that locks, for example, and park staff that need to be paid. So now if visitation drops, then the revenue from that visitation is going to drop too. What is that going to mean for the future of your park? So the next time that you go and volunteer for an invasive plant removal project, you're doing so much more than just helping the environment. You're actually preserving an outdoor space for your entire community.
Yeah, that's a good topic because there's one place in particular that's near and dear to my heart here in Central Washington where for the past 3 years, and I'm blanking on the name of the invasive plant, kind of looks like something from a Dr. Seuss book, but it was started off as a small patch in this forest land, and every year it's just spreading and choking out the native species. And it's just one of those things that it's hard to eradicate. And, who knows how it got there, whether it, by boot, by human, by wind, but it's definitely impacting the local environment and species. And I think that's something that people sometimes aren't aware of, because I'm not going to lie, it looks beautiful when it's blooming, but then that means that the seeds are spreading. So bringing that awareness, and if places have those shoe scrubbers that I'm starting to see more and more of, definitely do it before and after each hike, because you can have some hitchhikers on the bottom of your boots or shoes that you're not aware of.
Yes, absolutely. So it's the little things. All those little things add up to bigger things.
You know, Jessica, you've had quite a list of different guests with different backgrounds on your podcast. I'm always curious to get the host's opinion on how they decide on not just the guests, but maybe the topics of each episode.
Well, I try to diversify it as much as possible. Anything that I think my audience, anything that might be novel or new to my audience is usually something that I'm interested in. Also, if there's some sort of conservation aspect or community aspect, that's also something that I'm usually interested in. You know, the outdoors are not separate. Like, we are not separate from the outdoors, right? Our lives should be connected to the outdoors, and our communities are connected to the outdoors. And so I try to look for guests that can talk about how all of those things tie together. But I will also say that, you know, seasonal as well. Like, I try to, and I learned this the hard way. I once released an episode about whitewater paddling in November. And the first response that I got was from a listener who said, really great episode. Too bad it's now too cold to paddle. And that's not exactly true, but it'd be true if you had a paddling wetsuit and somebody to go with and, you know, access to the equipment that time of year. Not so much for somebody who's a newbie. Then I started rethinking, like, okay, I need to release episodes that are timely for the season as well, just like I wouldn't have released the episode about ice climbing in summer. So, you know, maybe in summer I do an episode about surfing or boogie boarding or something like that. So trying to make it seasonally appropriate, but also approachable for new folks. So if somebody has never tried rock climbing and they've never even thought about rock climbing, you know, let's do an episode that introduces them to something that they've never tried. I mean, for me, I only recently got into rock climbing maybe 4 years ago. And it wasn't that I didn't want to rock climb. I just never even thought about it. It wasn't even on my radar. I was someone who hiked and I camped and I rode my bike and I paddled, but it just was not something that I had considered until a friend said, hey, I want to try rock climbing, but I don't want to go alone. Do you want to go with me? And then I was like, yeah, okay, let me give this a try. So sometimes it just takes an introduction to an activity that you've never tried to make you even think about it. Now, if you listen to my episode about rock climbing, you're like, nah, not for me. Cool. No big deal. But for some folks, they might try it. They might love it. They might get hooked, or it just might be something that they do occasionally. It just, opens up the door of possibilities for things to do outdoors.
One thing that I saw recently, Jessica, is that you just kicked off season 5 of the podcast. Can you provide a sneak peek into what listeners can expect in the new season?
Oh, I would love to. So I have an episode about hiking at Breaks Interstate Park. So for anybody who's unfamiliar with Breaks, it is one of only a few interstate parks in the entire country, meaning that part of the park is in Virginia and the other part of the park is in Kentucky. And so both states share the funding responsibility. So what that really means is that nobody truly funds the whole park. So the park is located on the Russell Fork Gorge, and it is absolutely stunning as far as being a natural gem. The nickname of the park is the Grand Canyon of the South. And it's got everything from whitewater paddling to zip lining and also elk tours. The park has come up with some really inventive ways to attract people to the park and the surrounding region. And it's got beautiful luxury cabins on the lake. I mean, it's just really an absolute gem of a park. So it's a 2-part episode. The first part is about the hiking trails in the park, which range from easy to very strenuous. There are some trails that actually go down into the canyon. And I love those trails because you're getting a perspective of the park that the majority of visitors don't get. Most people go there for these epic canyon views, and they go to one of several overlooks and they'll stand there and they'll look out, but very few people are going down into the canyon. These are some extremely difficult butt-kicking hikes, but they are absolutely worth it. I just think that the perspective of these huge sandstone cliffs above you and the stream and the river below you is amazing, truly amazing. So that's the first half. The second half is about a brand new not brand new. It's actually been around for a little bit, but it's relatively new. And it's also very much unknown. It's the Pine Mountain Trail, which is a long distance trail that's supposed to go from the Breaks all the way down to Cumberland Gap National Historical Park. The sections of this trail are complete, but they're still working on other sections. And it's going to be a link in the Great Eastern Trail as well. The second part of this episode is all about the building of that trail and which parts are accessible now for both backpackers and really great day hikes. And the one section that we sort of highlighted in that episode was the Birch Knob section, which Birch Knob is an old fire tower that is now like a lookout platform. And from that area of Appalachia, you can see 5 different states from this lookout tower. So very cool. So beautiful. And then after that, I have an episode coming out about snakes. Every so often, I love to do what I call just an educational episode. Last spring, I did one about ticks and tick-borne diseases and safety for hikers and people in the outdoors. And now I'm doing one about snakes. And a little spoiler alert, snakes can't hurt you. We only have 3 venomous snakes here in Virginia. Only one of them is found statewide. And if you don't mess with them, they don't mess with you. So, there's a lot of really interesting, fascinating information in this episode about snakes. Hopefully it will help dispel a lot of rumors, a lot of misinformation, and hopefully folks will realize that snakes are not something to be afraid of, or so many other things like ticks that we really should be afraid of. Snakes are not one.
Oh, I'll definitely be tuning into that. I'm trying to get over my fear of snakes. And for me, it's rattlesnakes because we have a ton of rattlesnakes in Eastern Washington. But the more I talk to people, like you said, if you don't bother them, they won't bother you. For the most part, they give you a warning here in Washington State if you're getting too close. So I'll definitely be checking that out. Jessica, how long is season 5?
My seasons usually run from fall till spring because I've noticed that once school lets out, people's podcast listening habits change. They're on vacation. They're not doing the usual listening in the car while they're commuting to work or listening while they're doing the dishes because now they're on the beach or doing something else. So that's when I take my break and sort of start planning for the next season.
And what's the frequency of the episode drops?
So I went from every other Tuesday to about every week now. But what I'm doing is I'm taking some of the longer episodes and I'm breaking them into 2 parts and releasing them 1 week apart. It's a little experiment that I'm doing based on some feedback I got on my listener survey that says that people tend to listen to shorter episodes. So I'm hoping breaking this up means that people are going to be consuming more of the episode because I've got information-packed episodes that I don't want people to miss.
And we'll be sure to link your website on the episode show notes so people can check out your website as well as the podcast and find it on their favorite podcast platform. These last questions are ones that we like to ask all our guests. The first one is, when it comes to hikers, I feel like a lot of them have a regular summit routine, or maybe it's an end of the hike routine. Sometimes it's a favorite snack or drink. Maybe it's a moment of zen or the favorite meal afterward. Is there a regular custom or routine that you like to do when you reach your destination or when you make it back out?
Yes, and most of it has to do with cold weather hiking because I love to have a mug of hot tea either with me or waiting for me in the car. And then something else that I've started doing in the last couple of years is making my own dehydrated backpacking meals. There is something to be said about eating your own meal that you made yourself in your dehydrator at home, either on the trail or when you get off the trail. It's so much more rewarding than just opening up that meal that you bought at REI. I really enjoy that. It's given me a lot of control over what I eat, and I try to avoid all of the bad additives that get put into the usual backpacking meals that you find on the shelf. And also, I don't eat any animal products, so that it really limits my choices. I get tired of eating all these backpacking meals that just have oatmeal in them because I could bring my own oatmeal packet. Why would I do that? So, it's really awesome to have like a veggie and bean burrito at the end of my hike with, if I just throw a fresh avocado in there and a couple of tortilla rolls, then I've got I've got a gourmet meal at the end and I made it myself. So that's a lot of fun.
Now, this next one, Jessica, is about your pack list. Is there a luxury item that you tend to carry that falls outside of the essentials?
Well, I hope this doesn't age me, but I like to bring a camera, if anybody remembers what that is. A real camera and also a travel tripod. Photography has always been one of my hobbies for many, many years. And this obviously goes back to before our iPhones and our other mobile devices started to have acceptable camera quality. Now it's getting better, but I hate to tell most folks this because they will argue with me, but a camera is still going to be better quality than your phone. And because I really appreciate capturing the moments and having control over my images, I still carry a camera, and it's an art form, really. And I feel like it's a dying art form, but it's an art form, and there's something that brings me a lot of joy about being able to capture the beauty around me and the moments. And I recently started putting myself in the photos too, which means that I need to have a tripod. So now when I'm backpacking, that's not usually something I'm going to carry just because the weight and the space in the pack makes it almost impossible. I might bring the camera and leave the tripod at home, but I also use a mirrorless camera. So it's not a huge, heavy body and a huge lens. It's much more compact. So it's doable. But on a day hike, I would never go without it.
Now, this last one, Jessica, is there any hiking or travel goals for the remainder of the year or for 2025? And then goals for the podcast for the rest of the year and the new year in 2025?
I really want, as soon as the Pine Mountain Trail that I mentioned earlier is complete, I would really love to be able to hike from Breaks Interstate Park down to Cumberland Gap. So that is something that is on my list. I don't know if it'll happen this year. I'm not sure when the completion, especially since the hurricane hit a couple of weeks ago. Southwest Virginia is really hurting. The trail is technically open, but I know that there are sections that are still going to have down trees and things are not completely back to normal. So that might be a little bit of a setback, but that was one of my goals for this year that I hope it happens, but it's okay if it doesn't happen this year too. Another thing that I really would like to do is to paddle the length of the James River from Iron Gate in the Allegheny Mountains all the way down to the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. And I know that that's going to be a huge challenge, especially as you get closer to the bay, because the river goes from being a few yards across to like many miles across. And you feel like you're in the ocean because you don't see land. There are tides and there are rapids and there's other challenging issues. That journey is going to take a lot of planning, but that is something that I would also really like to do. So for the podcast in 2025, gosh, you're a podcaster too, so I think you can appreciate this. If I can just get my episodes out on time, I'd be happy.
Yeah, for sure. And Jessica, I'm really glad that you brought up the hurricane because I think the 24-hour news cycle goes ins and out with whatever's catchy or trending. But the states that were impacted by the hurricane are still in very much need. If folks wanted to help out those impacted in Virginia, do you have any recommendations on how they can support those communities?
Yes. In fact, I did a very short 15-minute interview with Amanda Livingston, who's the director of tourism in Smith County, Virginia, which is the home to Marion, Virginia. Anybody who has, through hiked the Appalachian Trail probably has stopped in Marion. It's a trail town. And it's also home to Mount Rogers, which is one of the highest peaks in Virginia. And then also Hungry Mother State Park, which is our oldest Virginia state park. So it's a very special place to us. And she talked about how this is impacting not just neighbors who don't have electricity, don't have Wi-Fi, might not even have running water, but also what this is going to mean long-term for all of us. And for those of us who love the outdoors and these outdoor spaces. And she talked about what it meant to be from there because these are places that they treasure. And many, many people rely on outdoor recreation for their livelihood. And when these places close, when the AT is closed, when Mount Rogers National Recreation Area is closed, when the state park is closed, people are really going to be hurting. It's going to impact their businesses. It's going to impact their livelihood. And it's going to be this way for a long time. It is scary to think that these places are going to be hurting for a very long time and people are going to forget very quickly. So my suggestion would be to give that podcast episode a quick listen. It's not long. It's 15 minutes. And in the show notes, I have linked many resources, both resources for checking on the status of trails, parks, and other outdoor spaces, but then links to places where you can donate. But really the best thing that you can do is to visit when they are ready to have visitors again. That is the most important thing. If you would like to donate, those links are there too, but we have to think long term. And the best way to help these communities get back on their feet is to bring the tourism dollars back. So if you're thinking about where you're going to plan your vacation next year, think about Southwest Virginia and some of the other areas that have been impacted.
Appreciate you sharing that, Jessica. And we'll be sure to link that episode in this episode show notes so people can check out that interview and find out how they can help out those communities impacted by the hurricane. This last section of the podcast, Jessica's round of this or that questions. I'm going to give you 10 hiking related topics and you just choose which one you prefer out of the two. Sometimes you can say both or neither if you don't like either of them. But the first one is, do you prefer hiking in the summer or in the fall?
You know, I feel like you're going to think I'm crazy after what I just told you about how awful last summer was in Virginia, but I still really love summer hiking. I think the colors really pop. I think the wildlife is active. The wildflowers, it's just so pretty. I really, really love it. And in the fall is pretty too, but there's something about the seasons changing that I find a little bit depressing. Like, I know we're going into winter and I still love winter too, but there's something about those long summer nights and being able to sleep with the windows open and just feeling a little closer to nature in the warmer months than in winter when we're kind of holed up in our homes.
Now, this next question is a hard one. Waterfalls or summits?
Neither, because they're all too crowded. There are too many people who are looking for that great view or, you know, they got to get to the waterfall. And, you know, I understand that those are beautiful hikes, but the trails that have really epic views and great waterfalls are the ones that have the most crowded parking lots at the trailhead too. And that's just not my scene. I would much rather pick a trailhead that has no other cars in it. I don't care if I'm not seeing a waterfall or a summit. I'm there to enjoy the hike in peace and quiet. And I don't want to feel like I'm standing in line on the streets of New York City to get up to the waterfall to take a selfie and all the things that go along with it. So I'm going to say neither.
This next one is about trail systems. Do you prefer a trail with switchbacks or would you rather just go straight up?
Ooh, I'm going to say switchbacks because my knees are not as young as they used to be.
And this next one's our most controversial one, but trek poles or freehand?
I have converted to poles. They are now another appendage on my body I don't leave without. It makes such a difference. For all these years that I've been hiking without it, I'm like, what the heck was I doing all those years? Like, that's crazy. Who doesn't go out without trekking poles? Do yourself a favor. They're worth it.
And this next one's about your footwear, but do you rock trail runners or do you wear a traditional hiking boot?
My closet is full of both. I was hiking boots all the way. And then this past year, I bought my first pair of runners and I haven't totally converted, but I'm like, wow, these things are so great. They're lightweight, all the things, right? But I still also really enjoy my boot, especially for colder weather and more rugged terrain. I feel like they're great for that. And the trail runners, even though they're supposed to be waterproof, they aren't really. I have two pairs now and they're both supposed to be waterproof and neither one of them truly is. So, you know, when it comes to rain or snow or anything like that, I would never get rid of my boots. But for hot weather or easier trails, I love the lightweight of the runners.
This next one is another trail system question, but do you like a loop trail or an out and back trail?
Ooh, I think I would go with the loop trail because you're not backtracking. You're seeing something new the entire hike. And when you see something new, you never know what's going to be around the next corner. Maybe it's a bear or maybe it's just a really cool migrating bird that you haven't seen since this time last year. So you just never know. There's a surprise around every corner when you're doing a loop hike.
And this next one, I think Virginia has both of these, but if you had to choose between them, would you prefer a muddy trail or a rocky trail?
Definitely rocky. Yeah, because mud is dangerous. Honestly, you know, I feel like between slipping or twisting an ankle, yeah, I'm going to go with rocky. You can make a more educated choice about where you're putting your your foot. With mud, there's a much better chance that you're going to slip and fall and end up injured. So I'm going to go with the rocks.
And then this one's another tough one because I think Virginia has beautiful ones in both categories, but sunset hikes or sunrise hikes?
I couldn't tell you how many beautiful sunrises we have because I'm asleep for most of them. So I'm going to go with sunsets.
And then this one's an equally tough one, but spring wildflowers or fall colors?
Definitely spring wildflowers. You know, that first indication of the seasons changing warms everything, right? Like when you're walking along and everything is gray and brown, and then you look down and you see a flower, you know spring's on the way, and it's the best sign. After a long, hard winter, it's the best thing you could see.
And then the last one is, if you had to choose between these two, would you rather do a steep climb or long distance?
Probably long distance because I'm more into the experience. You know, I want to be outside for as long as possible and not so much the challenge. I'm not a fast hiker. I don't care how many miles I get under my belt in one day. I like to stop to take a lot of pictures. I'm also a birder, so I'm looking and listening to birds. I'm looking for other wildlife. I'm taking lots of different pictures and just being completely present. So I would much rather be on the trail for a long time and immersed in that experience than challenging myself. But that doesn't mean I'm not up for a good challenge every now and then too.
Well, that was it, Jessica, for the this or that questions. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your experiences, not just with the outdoors, but also with your podcast. For folks that are interested in learning more about your podcast, your social media handles, where are some of the places they can learn more about not just yourself, but also the podcast?
So the two main social media platforms are Instagram and Facebook, and you can just search Virginia Outdoor Adventures and it'll pop right up. If you want to learn more about the show and find links, then you can visit the website, virginiaoutdooradventures.com.
Awesome. And we'll be sure to add those to the episode show notes so people can check them out. Jessica, it's been awesome talking to you and learning more about not just Virginia, but about your podcast and your personal experiences. Really appreciate you coming on our podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope to make it out to where you are one day soon, and maybe we can do a hike together.
Oh, that would be awesome. Please do. When you come out to the Pacific Northwest, let me know.
I will. Thanks.
And that brings us to the end of this episode alongside Jessica. We extend a heartfelt thanks to her for coming on the podcast. Make sure to follow her adventures on Instagram at Virginia Outdoor Adventures. Also, don't forget to check out the episode show notes to learn more about her podcast and how you can help communities impacted by the 2024 hurricane season. We have an incredible lineup of episodes planned throughout the fall months, and we can't wait to share them with you. New episodes will be dropping every Monday, with occasional bonus episodes on Fridays. To ensure that you never miss out on those thrilling tales, remember to hit the like and subscribe button. Your support means the world to us. Don't forget to join our vibrant community on Instagram at Hikes and Mics. We'll be sharing episode visuals, my own personal hiking content, and so much more. Let's stay connected and continue to inspire each other on this remarkable journey. As we bid farewell, remember to tread those happy trails, embrace the great outdoors, and keep the spirit of adventure alive. Until next time, my fellow explorers, happy hiking. This episode's music was created by Ketsa. Follow him on Instagram at Ketsa Music. This episode is brought to you by Ursa Minor Outfitters. Folks, I'm absolutely in love with my loon mug. It's handmade, it's an absolute piece of art. Whether it's at the office or at the house, people keep asking to check it out. If you're not a loon fan, they also have other beautiful mugs for wildlife fans of moose, bears, and eagles. They specialize in products highlighting the outdoors and local pride through quality design by local artists. They've even started expanding into items beyond mugs, like apparel, dog accessories, and soon candles and more. They also try to partner and highlight other small businesses, and in some cases, forego profits in lieu of charitable giving to help their community, such as the dog rescue. So check them out, ursaminoroutfitters.com, and enter promo code HikesMikes10 at checkout to receive 10% off your order. And for our four-legged hiking partners, they also have a portable silicone dog bowl and also a sweet over-the-collar dog bandana. Go check them out, ursaminoroutfitters.com, and don't forget to enter promo code HikesMikes10 at checkout to receive 10% off your order.